Council designed to do something similar for the rangelands, which obviously cover a very large part of the planet and are very relevant for the convention that we're here to talk about today. So my name's Dave McElroy. I work for the Sustainable Fibre Alliance as the head of standards there. You'll tell from my accent that I grew up in Australia, where I was surrounded by sheep and kangaroos. I now live in the UK, where I'm surrounded by sheep and badgers instead, which is close enough to the same and a little bit different to make it exciting as well. We've got a few good speakers here today to discuss this new council. We'll cover a few things, the basics of exactly what we're talking about. But I think what's really interesting here is how these sorts of mechanisms can lead to sustainable commodities. So we can link in with business and we can link in with finance to create systems that are sort of self-funding, ultimately in the end by creating added value through sustainability in an explicit tradable way. I will introduce the individual speakers as they come up. The first person that we'll be hearing from today, we'll be hearing just through a video. We have Louise Baker, who is the Managing Director of the Global Mechanism of the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification. In this context, with this audience, I don't think any more introduction is probably needed. So if we could have that first video, that would be great. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. The vast and diverse grasslands and open rangelands of the world are the wild, untamed frontiers of our planet. Picture this. You're standing on the edge of a sprawling grassland, the wind ruffling your hair, the sky a deep blue, a huge herd of healthy livestock is roaming and grazing nearby. This is an enchanting world, a place where pastoralists, herders and ranchers are self-reliant in almost every way, except that they rely on the land's bounty for their livelihoods. This is not just a place where these communities work, it's their entire way of life. Rangelands aren't just landscape, they're an integral part of our cultural identity. But grasslands and rangelands rarely get the recognition they deserve on the global stage. Rangelands, covering over half of our planet's surface, provide economic benefits, environmental services, and immense cultural riches that are, more often than not, taken for granted. The data that expresses the true value of grasslands and rangelands just isn't out there, because we have in our hands a natural and highly valuable treasure chest, but we seem to have misplaced the key. As a result, that picture of that enchanting world that you had in your mind is no rural idyll. The grasslands and rangelands are increasingly under siege, compounded by climate change, overgrazing, land use change, invasive species, wildfires, and drought mean land degradation and desertification are gathering pace. In the worst affected areas, sand and dust storms make life unlivable. We know approximately 20% of the total rangelands in the world are degraded, making life on the range very, very tough. The United Nations has declared 2026 the International Year of Rangelands and Pastoralists. To play our part, the UNCCD is delighted to be working with you all to help conserve, sustainably manage, and restore the land. We call that land degradation neutrality. And we are delighted to be partnering with the Rangeland Stewardship Council and others, because by managing the grasslands and rangelands well, we could unlock the real potential of the world's great grassland and rangeland ecosystems. And in that, private stakeholders in particular have a vital role to play. Working together with herders and pastoralists, Indigenous communities, and experts on sustainability, you can ensure the long-term environmental health and economic viability of the rangelands. So in that sense, the development of the global rangeland standards is truly an exciting development. It will minimize the risk of soil and pasture degradation and over time reverse it. It will keep livestock healthy and protect wildlife. It will build the resilience to the impacts of climate change and effectively benefit production, improving quality and boosting livelihoods. That enchanting image in our mind can only become a reality if we make it happen together. Thank you.
Excellent. Yeah, I think that sums it up really well, and also gave me time to finish off the sweet I'd foolishly put in my mouth just before we started. Next up, we're going to hear from Una, who's the CEO of the SFA, so the Sustainable Fibre Alliance, which has had some great success rapidly growing the certification scheme with regard to cashmere. And anyone who's worked with her, and she's my boss, I can vouch for this, can tell you that she's a force of nature, and to have her as a driving force behind the RSC, I think is a good sign of where we're going to get to and how we're going to get there quickly. So Una, if you would like to come up and explain to people a bit more about the RSC and how it works, and then I'll go into the boring details when you're done.
Morning, everybody. It's really great to see so many of you today, and I'm delighted to be here today representing global Rangeland Stewardship Council, as well as our organization, Sustainable Fibre Alliance. So rangelands are vital for sustaining biodiversity, securing food security and livelihood for millions of people globally. So we have launched a Rangeland Stewardship Council and a Global Rangeland Standard on Land Day on 4th of December. So it is really a momentous occasion for us in presenting in a COP 16 of the UNCCD. Yeah. So essentially, we wanted to thank our partners, UNCCD, Stellar Project, within Stellar Project, that's implemented by International Livestock Research Institute and supported by and funded by supported by IUCN and funded by Global Environmental Fund. So we are a dozen of partners who are working together in bringing Global Rangeland Standard and Rangeland Stewardship Council. Without further ado, we've prepared a small video of Sustainable Fibre Alliance, who we are and why we're supporting the Global Rangeland Standards. I'll put a small video to start our session.
The SFA is a non-profit, standard holding and membership organisation that represents a global alliance of supply chain actors, stakeholders and industry experts with a mission to drive positive change in natural fibre value chains. Our vision is for a responsible and inclusive global natural fibre sector that balances and safeguards the health and well-being of people, animals and the environment and rangelands. Our work first started by supporting cashmere herders in Mongolia, working with the end-to-end supply chain. We now work with over 160,000 herders across Mongolia and China, connecting them to traders, processors, spinners, suppliers, manufacturers, and brands and retailers in the global fashion industry, ensuring all adhere to the SFA chain of custody. Focused on the herder level, the SFA Cashmere Standard outlines 5 global principles for responsible cashmere production. These are effective management, decent work, biodiversity and land use, animal welfare, and fibre quality improvement. We are only able to make these positive impacts from funding solely received through the private sector. This 100% private sector funding is invaluable to supporting Indigenous communities and the rangelands. Through this commitment, the SFA is working together with like-minded organisations who are dedicated to improving the rangelands and reversing the effects of desertification as part of the Rangeland Stewardship Council, or RSC initiative. The RSC's mission is the establishment of a global benchmark for responsible rangeland management through the creation of a unified rangeland standard. The initiative's approach combines the importance of collaboration, regional specificity, One Health, a bottom-up strategy, and transparency. As part of the Rangeland Stewardship Council, We'll be ensuring the livelihoods of herders and pastoralists globally by diversifying into other value chains, such as dairy, leather and hides, and meat products, building on what we have learnt in the cashmere sector. From this, we will be working with multi-stakeholders to support the world's rangelands by ensuring compliance with laws, establishing a framework for Indigenous people and local communities, promoting effective management practices, upholding decent work standards, and encouraging the adoption of sustainable rangeland stewardship practices. If you would like to learn more about the Rangeland Stewardship Council and our work, then please visit rangelandstewardship.org for more information. Thank you.
Yeah, so as you can see, the global rangeland standard will act as a catalyst for private sector investment for rangeland restoration by providing clear and accountable standard that align sustainability goals with long-term economic and environmental benefits through a commercially viable solutions that embrace new technology and innovation. At the heart of kind of our work, if you like, we set out a long-term objectives of how we're going to achieve our aims and goals. So theory of change is, as a standard holding organization, really important way of how we're going to achieve, better land degradation neutrality, how we're going to bring better income security for herder communities. This shows the theory of change for Sustainable Fibre Alliance. It's showing the short, medium, and long-term outcomes and outputs, and outlining these necessary steps and resources and strategies required in achieving these aims and objectives. As you can see here on the strategic pillar part, within SFA, we think collaboration and convening is one of the key ways for us in achieving greater impact together. So working across multi-stakeholder environment, we need to bring landscape jurisdiction-based approach and working with wider stakeholders and wider sectors to be able to achieve the land degradation neutrality and aims and objectives of the Rangeland Stewardship Council, as well as our organization, in this case, with Sustainable Fibre Alliance. So essentially, this market-driven approach is for providing better management practices, reduce poverty, and address land degradation neutrality. How we're going to bring this, what kind of approach we'll bring is that it's really important for us in bringing a collaborative approach. We always say that if you wanted to go quick, go on your own. But if you wanted to bring a greater impact, it's always important for us to work together collaboratively. And another key aims and objective of us is that it needs to be landscape jurisdiction-based approach where it's regionally specific, providing better local ownership, working with local initiatives and stakeholders, and bringing Indigenous knowledge and wisdom to be part of the development. Also, it's really important for us to take more holistic approach in bringing One Health as part of our conceptual framework and implementation, because we all know that environmental, social challenges are all very interlinked, animal health, welfare as well. So the human health, animal health, and environmental health are all interlinked. And these interlinked challenges needs to be integrated within the approach and addressing this interlinked challenges. So the One Health is the approach that we're going to use as part of our work in implementing the global rangeland standard. Also, we know that how important Indigenous knowledge and wisdom in addressing land degradation neutrality globally. Rangelands are diverse. The approach that we can take in bringing land degradation neutrality in any place is also very diverse. And we have varying ecosystem across our land. We've got deserts, we've got grasslands, we've got tundra, we've got savanna, and the Indigenous people having their own knowledge in addressing these challenges as a bottom up is going to be really important. It's not going to, the solution is not with a top down approach where the colonial people in the Western world telling people this is how you do it. It's really important we integrate Indigenous wisdom as part of a solution in bringing better land degradation neutrality. So also as part of a standard holding organisation, we need to bring more transparent approaches, consultation, and making sure multi-stakeholder communities are consulted transparently. So come and join us. Within the Rangeland Stewardship Council, we've got a number of committees that we've set up, and we would like to invite you as part of a standard system. It's really important. In here, you can see the key principles of the Global Rangeland Standard. The key part of the standard is rangeland stewardship, and looking into land and its biodiversity, how it should be managed, and also Indigenous people's rights and land tenure is going to be really key important part of the standard, and legal compliance, and also the decent work and effective management of the standard. And as well as the kind of key standard part, there are a number of, it's a standard system, so it's important for us in how we can build the capacities of herders and farmers and wider communities, bringing better assurance and ensuring that chain of custody is maintained across the supply chain in order to bring better transparent traceability for the rangeland commodity and products, and how we can bring better claims policy for brands, retailers sourcing this product effectively will be included as part of that. One of the last bits of here says MEL is monitoring, evaluation, learning, and what kind of impact that we are bringing. I'll talk about it a bit later on in my next slide. So really, globally, we need to bring a better research, better platforms for us to be collaborating and bringing better research. So in here, it's really important for us, as well as the kind of data and research to support land management at the bottom level and with the herder communities. We also need to ensure that this data system is supporting wider policy that the government, for example, we've got European Union developing our policies in bringing Green Claims Directive. So it's really important for us that we're bringing the network and research excellences working together, and better rangeland management data systems. So in that note, we've set up a science technical committee, and if anybody wanted to join the monitoring, evaluation and learning science technical committee, please come and join us. We had a first meeting in October in Nairobi, brought together by CGIAR centres and ICRAF together. So there is dozens of partners who will work on this area together. So if you would like to join, come and join us, as well as the kind of research that we carry out as part of a standard monitoring. It's really important for us in bringing social biodiversity and the impact of nexus across gender, environment, and animal health welfare is going to be a really important part. Funding mechanism is also obviously the key part of how we can bring this going forward. And I would like to give you kind of a bit of a background. We've been working together in establishing Rangeland Stewardship Council and Global Rangeland Standard for the last 2 years or so. So we've got a really important trajectory and milestone in year 2026. Mongolia is going to host the next COP in Mongolia in year 2026. It's an important milestone for us in bringing pilot implementation and flagship projects and bringing credible product certification in 2026. It seems to be far away, but 2 years and a year and a half doesn't, it will just come so quickly. So get involved with our work, and this is a really important timeline we're working towards as part of our project with our partners. So we, as well, cross rangelands, we're going to bring several working groups that set up, and with close to our heart where we're working is the natural fiber group, and we have wool, cashmere, mohair, alpaca, all across the different fiber communities come together. We have Natural Fiber Connect kind of conferences every year. Come and join our conference. Next one is going to be in September. So we also, as well as the fibre, it's really important for us in bringing other working groups such as leather working groups and crop seeds and other wider committees. So come and join our committees. There is a community portal that you can join through our Rangeland Stewardship Council website. One of the key things that we are looking to bring flagship projects through national hubs. So we will be able to give you a little bit more information if you're interested. Contact us. And I know as part of our investment opportunities, our Leonard's going to talk about the investment opportunities and of wider rangeland ecosystem services. And yeah, so we are open and interested in discussing opportunities and how we can work in bringing the global rangeland standard to be widely adopted globally. And thank you for your attention. I just wanted to give you back to Dave. Thank you for your attention.
Great. Yeah, thanks. Thank you, Una. So yeah, that's a whistle-stop tour of a lot of work that's happened in the last couple of years. So for me, I'm going to go into a bit more detail now and actually talk a little bit about the widget, you know, the Duvalaki that we're actually talking about here. So yeah, double title slide. I'm special. Right. What is a standard setter? So going really right back to the basics here. So it's what it says on the box, that we set standards at the SFA, and this is what the RSC will be. And the idea is that standard setters create a codified definition of what good looks like in terms of ethical production of a particular commodity, and all the way along the supply chain as well. So you could have standards for how the processing is done. And basically the idea is that by having it all in one space, written down with a clear definition of what good looks like, people can then follow suit and all work together. And the idea is that by creating a system like this with assurance and certification that underpins it, you're able to connect at one end of the supply chain, the consumer, with what's happening at the other end of the supply chain in the production, so they know for sure that the product that they're purchasing is the most ethical version of the one that they could choose, of those that they could choose from. The other important thing here is obviously there's a value chain there with lots of people are contributing added value along the way. With a system like this, it's clear who is contributing that value and where, and so it's more likely that everyone contributing value gets the benefits of that value, rather than the value just being captured by the one actor in the supply chain that has the most power. So it creates a more equitable value chain. Now it's worth talking about at this point credible claims through third-party assurance. Obviously, any company can put a logo, you know, dolphin safe or anything on their product, and they have a conflict of interest to do so. What we're talking about here is a third-party assurance system whereby there are these independent bodies called conformity assessment bodies or certification bodies, you may have heard them called, that aren't the producer. They're not the standard setter. They're not the brand at the end that's making the decision as to whether or not that product or that producer is certified. It's these independent bodies, and that's really important for mitigating conflicts of interest. And so, yes, if you ever see a sustainability logo and you're wondering if it's worth its salt, the first thing you should always do is see who gets to make the decision as to what products can bear that logo. So we believe that because of this sort of mechanism, you know, equity in the value chain, transparency and credibility in certification, we're actually able to lead producers and businesses to a place where their efforts are minimizing environmental impact, safeguarding producer livelihoods, and meeting high animal welfare standards. So the global rangeland standards specifically. So as Una was talking about in her presentation, she was talking about this One Health concept, and that really is this idea that in order to protect the rangelands, you need to protect the interests and livelihoods of those who are living on those rangelands. whether they're the humans or the other animals occupying that space. You need to look after all three of those as one, because if you're not doing that, then you'll find that those who are left out are probably fighting against what you're trying to do. Another thing about the Rangeland Standard that really explains why the SFA, the Sustainable Fibre Alliance, is interested in this is, so we certify cashmere production, right? And the idea that we can certify cashmere producers and put a burden on them as individuals to save the rangelands and restore the rangelands is quite unreasonable. It's, you know, and that's because there are lots of actors who are competing for that space and using those resources, and they all need to be getting on the same page. And the idea with the Rangeland Standard is, rather than just looking at an individual commodity like an animal fiber, you know, we bring all of the different commodities making use of that space together, whether it's other animal fibers, leather, meat, dairy, and even going into other things that are using those spaces like crop seed, or even say a solar panel farm. You know, it's just because it's not got animals on it doesn't necessarily mean that it couldn't have animals on it and couldn't be thought of as a rangeland. And so really just about anything could be considered so long as it met the standard. So how would it actually work in practice? The idea is that the Rangeland Standard would define what good looks like for most of the sort of landscape level stuff. So things to do with land use change, biodiversity impacts, compliance with local law, in particular, things to do with land tenure, with focus on Indigenous people's rights, to make sure that those participating in that system have a right to be using the land and are doing so in a way that doesn't distract or just draw from other people's traditional rights to have that land. Focuses on decent work, so looking after people, and effective management, so running a tight ship, making sure that things are working correctly. And so the Rangeland Standard would provide space for that, and then it would look to other standards that exist already out there, such as, for example, the SFA Animal Fibre Standard, to function as a commodity standard. And these other standards would be able to cover the things that are specific to that commodity. So what sorts of resources do they consume? What sorts of waste do they put out? Do they use animals as part of their production, in which case animal welfare becomes an important idea. And the reason this has been chosen to work this way is we don't want to duplicate standards. We don't want to create a new standard. What we want to do is build on all of the existing work that's been done and try and bring together everyone into the one tent. The other thing we really don't want to do, and Una was talking about this, is not wanting to take a colonial top-down approach. You know, we want to be able to go to a particular context or a particular region, see how they believe, you know, what good looks like within their context, for their commodity, for their culture, see that it fits within the overarching framework, and kind of go from there. We want it to be plug and play. We want to be able to welcome people in rather than exclude them, because those outside the tent aren't going to be making making improvements, but those inside can. So yes, Una was covering some of this. So at a really high level, these are the sorts of principles that would appear in a standard, and I'm going to go right into the detail now. You then go into another layer where you start talking about sub principles, and start talking about the individual components. So yes, we talk about animal welfare, but within that we'd be talking about nutrition and water, and then we'd be talking about slaughter practices. You know, there's all these different sub principles, and then we'd get down to the bottom, which is, I guess, the unit of assessment that we're actually looking at when we go through the check. Is we've got these requirements, and these are the sorts of things you would see. These are just some examples. The rangeland user, so the producer, the certificate holder, shall conserve natural habitats and biodiversity on the land they use. The rangeland user shall identify natural watercourses and wetlands and implement measures to protect them. They shall take measures to avoid the introduction of alien species. These are all the sorts of individual components, and you can imagine all the others that roll out. And you'll also probably notice that these are still a little bit vague. And this links back to why the third-party assurance thing becomes important, because ultimately, if we're too specific, we're going to be colonial, which is bad as a matter of principle, but it's also stupid because it stifles innovation, right? And prevents people having new, good ideas. And so the role of the conformity assessment body, those independent assessors, is to come in and look at what is being done on the ground and make an educated, informed decision as to whether that fits with the standard. And of course, they can then be held accountable to those decisions. To go back to the transparency principle that Una was talking about, is those decisions are public and people have mechanisms for challenging it. So if you've got an NGO that thinks something is being done incorrectly, or an academic that has a feud with another academic and wants to challenge it, there'll be mechanisms for them to do that. So this is just a bit of talk about the consultations that we've done. So obviously we've talked a lot about collaboration and bringing things together. We don't want to create something that's just out of our ivory tower. We've been doing a lot of work to try and talk to a lot of people. We obviously can't talk to everyone, but we want to talk to a diversity of people to hopefully catch those big mistakes and big blind spots that we might have. So yeah, a whole bunch of stuff, which I won't go through because I think we're a bit behind time already. And this is a high level timeline of kind of where we are at this process. So the last 2 years, we've kind of had a first draft of the standard that we've been doing consultation with, and we've got loads and loads of feedback, and we now know first draft is not adequate. So we're going to go away, take all of those learnings, come up with a second draft standard. And this year will be we'll put that online and communicate it wide and far to try and mass consult, come up with a final version and go from there. Here's some more information if you want to get to the RSC website. If you want to see a statement of intent, which is kind of like the 2 or 3 pager, might be a few more pages than that, that just kind of summarizes what we've been talked about. And if you're already interested in providing some feedback, there's a consultation form that basically lives online that anyone can participate in at any time. I'll pause there. And let people use that whilst I think about our next session, where we have online, we have Dr. Shalini Raghav, who also works for the SFA. And I'm really pleased that we have Shalini working with us. She's one of those people who has done lots of different things across lots of different aspects of the textile sector. And then you probably get the impression that the Rangeland Stewardship Council needs experts as well as generalists, and the fact that she manages to be both makes her the perfect person to have here. So she's going to talk. Can we bring up the next? Shall we bring up Shalini now, who I imagine is ready? She's going to talk a little bit more about principles for developing standards. She's going to talk about ISEAL, which is basically a standard setter for standard setters. And then after that, we're going to hear short presentations from Dr. Cara Loomis and Dr. Roy Benke, who I'll introduce as well. And these are sort of little lightning presentations that should give you a flavor of the approach that we're taking and the sorts of things that we're interested in making, doing to make this standard as good as it can be.
Hi, Dave. Thank you. Sorry, but just setting my camera.
Yeah, we can see you.
Yeah,
we can see you and we can hear you.
Okay, that's great. I'll share my screen. Can you see my presentation?
Yeah, we can see the notes. We can see the notes page, not the like expanded presenting screen. Yes, that's it. That's it.
Yeah. Okay. Just give me 1 more second. Okay. Hi. Good morning. Good afternoon, everyone. So Dave has already introduced me. So I'm very pleased to work with SFA, and it's been 1.5 years now working with SFA. And in today's session, I will be providing briefly detail about ISEAL Code of Good Practice, which you might have already seen on Una's slide. We keep referring ISEAL because
I think, sorry, Shalini, I think your microphone has moved a little bit away from your mouth. It's a bit muffled. Sorry to interrupt you.
No worries, no worries. Can you hear me better now?
No, it's still, we can hear you, but it's quiet.
Okay.
It's like you're in a fridge or something.
Okay.
You're out of the fridge. We can hear you now. That's
Okay,
perfect.
sorry. I think the volume was down, and that was the reason. Yeah. Okay. Glad. So yes, today's session is mostly to briefly introduce you about the ICEAL, what the ICEAL code of good practice is, because the development of RSC Global Rangeland Standard is based on ICEAL code of good practice. So therefore, it's important to briefly explain about this. So ICEAL stands for International Social and Environmental Accreditation and Labeling Alliance, and is a global membership organization for sustainability systems. I always use Dave's way of explaining it like they are standards of a standard, because that's a very simple definition of it. They define best practice for standard systems through their code of good practices, which is a globally recognized framework, and that is built upon 10 credibility principles. And some of the principles you might have already heard from us, like transparency, stakeholder engagement, collaboration, sustainability impact. So this whole system lies around these 10 credibility principles. And why it matters? Because standard systems are essential for creating trust among stakeholders, including consumers, governments, and market players. Following ICEAL code of good practices, it increases the credibility. For example, they've also explained about the claims, and then the claim is by certification organization, but that certification organization is also recognized by some global framework that adds more value in terms of credibility and trust. And then there are key elements of this whole standard setting. So the first one is the standard setting, and within a standard setting, definitely it's more than just defining criteria. As again Dave said, like there are criteria, then there are principles, then there are requirements. But this is a collaborative process. It involves various stakeholders, includes local communities, researchers, and industry players. So it involves a range of voices, and that ensures that a standard reflects multiple perspectives, making the process as inclusive as possible. And that's how ICEAL's approach stands out for its emphasis on inclusivity and transparency. So through the process of public consultation, then the regular review and revision based on the feedback we receive through one-on-one stakeholder consultation or the public consultation, we use all that feedback and revise our standard, and then put it in the public domain and make it useful for others. So the process is definitely very inclusive and transparent in that sense. Then other important element comes is the once we have set the standards, then how do we make sure they are followed? Again, as what briefly they've explained about the third-party assessment. So that's where assurance comes in. So assurance is the process of checking compliance with the standards we have set. So it's about making sure that these standards are not just words on paper, but are actually being implemented on the ground. For example, at SFA, we rely on multiple layers of assurance, from self-assessment at the producer level to third-party audits conducted by independent conformity assessment bodies called CAPs. And we are also considering additional layer of CAPs oversight for further enhance the credibility. And then finally, the SFA's membership of ICEAL act as a final layer of assurance. And we aim to follow similar approach for RSC as well. And the last component of this is the MEL, so monitoring, evaluation, and learning, is key to measuring the effectiveness of a standard. So MEL helps us reflect on whether the standards are actually achieving their intended impact. And through continuous monitoring and evaluation, we gather insights into how well standards are working, while learning helps adapt and improve. So the goal is to use data to drive decisions, ensuring that the goals are being met, and if required, it's adjusted. And then there are different type of evaluation which which can be done over the period. Like there are formative evaluation which is done during the program, so that what needs to be improved. And then there are summative evaluation, because you also need to show others what impact that program has created. Then we used to do impact evaluation or underline with the underlying data collection. So, so these are the three key elements of standard setting organization. Just briefly summarizing again and re-emphasizing some of the phases the standard setting is, is key to ensure inclusivity, transparency, and that the standards remains regularly updated to meet evolving needs. Then second is assurance, which plays a critical role and ensure that independent and rigorous processes are in place to build trust across the supply chain, just not like the chain of custody, which already you have seen. So like through all the chain of at all level, we do have assurance. And then lastly, MEL is vital component that drives continuous improvement through data-driven learning. We can adapt and refine our approach over time to exceed our sustainability goals. And this diagram outlines the ICL sustainability framework, illustrating how sustainability standards are developed, assured and claimed by clients. So it shows the cycle of continuous improvement of MEL, support by data engagement and impact strategies to maintain integrity and credibility in sustainability efforts. So by integrating these elements, we create a system that not only meets the needs of today, but builds a strong foundation for the future. So it's a process, but it's really very important to make sure we learn at each step and we adapt as well while implementing our program. So yeah, that was it from my side. If you have any question and comment, please feel free to reach out to us. Yeah, over to you, Dave.
Great, thank you, Shalini. Yeah, I hope that the take home that you get from that is that actually developing the standard is just a small part of this. Setting up all the infrastructure that goes around it is quite big, and we're going to aim to do this right from the first place. It's not just going to be a matter of sticking a logo onto a product or something. I also think that with the EU is developing a lot of new legislation at the moment to do with sustainability certification. And I really hope that with all this stuff that Shalini's been talking about there, that we will be one of the ones that hit the ground running. I mean, I'm not sure exactly what the EU has in mind. I'm not sure they themselves know exactly what they have in mind, but whatever it is, I'm confident we'll be hitting the ground running. So thank you, Shalini. Very much appreciate you joining in remotely. So next we've got a video from Dr. Cara Loomis, who is fresh from her PhD in social anthropology, which she got at the University of Cambridge in 2022. I'm not sure I can use that line anymore now. It's 2 years. She's part of the old crew now. So yeah, she's a social scientist with combined interests in cashmere production, but particularly the social aspects of extensively managed pastoral landscapes. So really, really important area of work. And despite only managing that PhD in the last couple of years, the wealth of stuff that she's managed to work on with Save the Children in East Africa. In fact, she worked with the FAO in Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan. She's been to Western China, Kazakhstan, and Turkmenistan, doing all sorts of projects in this space. I hope gives you a sense of the experience that she's got and sort of where she's coming from in the things that she thinks is important for resolving. So I think we have a video to play here. I'm not, would you guys be able to get that?
My name is Cara Loomis, and I work for the Sustainable Fibre Alliance as a research analyst. And I'd like to talk to you a little bit about different approaches to certification, specifically a newer way of going about certification, which looks at a landscape or jurisdiction, and to bring in some examples from research we've been doing in Mongolia on these topics. So when we look at certification, historically, certification has happened at the level of the supply chain. So for example, with fair trade, you have a commodity that is certified across the supply chain. And in fair trade, they're particularly focused on ethical trading relationships. When you move to organic standards, again, it's a commodity, but here the emphasis is on the point of production and the point of processing to ensure that these two activities occur within organic regulations and requirements. So what this means is that we have these fixed geographic spaces, usually at a farm, or a processing factory. And it's at these points in place where you find the certification occurring, or within trading relationships. So one of the consequences is to create a situation where you can have an organic farm adjacent to a non-organic farm within the same socio-economic environment. And this creates this patchwork of variably managed land. So the approach taken by the Sustainable Fibre Alliance is broadly similar. Here we're certifying a commodity, cashmere, and we do this through our animal fibre standard. And unlike a farm context, we work with herder households, and we work with them to ensure that their animal welfare practices meet our requirements, their working conditions in the production unit are up to our requirements, and that they are sustainably managing the rangelands to their best ability. An important part of our standard is that we promote mobile pastoralism, or the ability to flexibly move with your livestock depending on resource availability. And we do this because of the science over the past 20, 30 years, which has suggested that livestock movement is an important part of rangeland sustainability. So this creates in our context a particular paradox or challenge, which is that herders might have to move long distances outside of the land that they normally graze on in order to support their livestock during an extreme weather event. And then how can we possibly measure the impact the SFA is having in terms of rangeland health and sustainability if herders are moving to other parts of the province or the region where there is no SFA certification? So to better understand some of these challenges, we received funding to undertake some research in Bayanova, Mongolia, to look at a landscape and jurisdictional approach to certification. So whereas in the past we had a commodity or supply chain that was certified, here the idea is that it is a place, a landscape that receives the level of certification. And this would encourage companies to invest beyond their particular commodity into the wider socio-natural environment. And we found that this approach, certainly in a rangelands context, is a huge advance from just looking at the commodity alone. But then we identified a couple of challenges that came about through the research. And one is that by delinking the certification from a commodity, it became harder to ensure stakeholder buy-in at all levels. Without that trading element, with that economic element, it was more challenging. The other issue that we uncovered is that, again, in a rangelands context, the jurisdictional boundary is maybe too delimited. As I mentioned previously, pastoralists need the ability to move outside of their administrative boundaries to respond to severe weather events. And lastly, because this remains a voluntary standard, it doesn't necessarily help us with our impact monitoring challenges, because it would require a buy-in, which we've established is more challenging from a wide network of stakeholders. So as a researcher, my solution is always to do more research. And I think these are interesting challenges. And there are a couple of topics that I think are worthy of future work. And one of them, as I mentioned, would be this idea of ensuring stakeholder buy-in. And one way to do that would be to continually link up private sector to support every stage, linking the production with the purchases as much as possible. And that's something that the SFA has been quite
Thank you, Cara, in absentee there. Yeah, so I think that gives you sort of a bit of a flavor of how we're thinking about the approach to the rangeland standards. So next we have another video presentation from Dr. Roy Benke, who's a leading ecologist with expertise in rangeland management and pastoral systems. He's been a former research fellow at Imperial College in London, faculty member at the University in the Department of Anthropology there as well. He's really done a lot of research on pastoralism, desertification, and land use, particularly in Africa and Central Asia. He continues to moonlight as a researcher through his work with Odessa Research, which has a real focus on ecological systems and rangelands globally. Would we be able to get, oh, should have clicked that already. Roy's presentation going in a moment, where we can obviously, we will hear a bit more about the monitoring, evaluation, and learning side, and the sorts of indicators that we would need to have in order to evaluate whether this sort of system, our rangeland standard, is working as intended. Thank you. Okay. Would anyone like to sing a song while we wait? Una, maybe some throat singing or something? Mongolian throat singing? Yeah, you can do some. Should we just? Yeah, well, we got Julian online. I think we're a bit behind anyway. So unfortunate to not hear from Roy, but so yeah, so we've got Julian Bayless.
My name is Roy Binky.
Oh no, we have
just completed writing a short consultancy report for the SFA, the Sustainable Fiber Alliance. The object of the report was to investigate Hello, my name is Roy Binky, and I've just completed writing a short consultancy report for the SFA, the Sustainable Fiber Alliance. The object of the report was to investigate practical indicators of environmental sustainability for rangeland livestock production systems, and that's the title of the report. It's a short one, 10 pages or so. The object of this talk is to introduce you to the report and to provoke you into reading. Global indicators of the environmental sustainability of livestock production are hard to come by, and for good reason. Rangeland environments are extensive. They cover maybe 40% of the Earth's land surface. And they run to steppe and desert and mountain environments, all very different from one another. And from yaks and camels to sheep and goats, rangelands support many different livestock species that produce multiple varied livestock products. Finally, rangelands are managed in different ways. The most obvious contrast being between fenced commercial ranching versus open range pastoralism, but there's many gradations in between the two. Given all this variability, it's no wonder that it's difficult to generalize about rangelands, even amongst rangeland professionals. There is no universal agreement as to what constitutes sustainability or how to manage it and how to measure it. Consumers nonetheless deserve to know if the products they are buying are destroying the environment. In this report, SFA presents 10 indicators of rangelands' health that begin to answer that question. There's considerable scientific evidence that livestock producers recognize the signs of rangeland degradation and understand what causes it. The indicators proposed here attempt to harness this indigenous environmental knowledge, cross-check it, and present it with enough rigor to convince outsiders of its value. This report follows current best practice amongst rangeland professionals in the Western U.S. regarding the criteria for undertaking sustainable grazing management. The consensus position is summarized in a scientific paper published last year that was titled Principles for Successful Livestock Grazing Management on Western U.S. Rangelands. This paper reviewed the results of a consultation and survey of rangeland experts from across the Western U.S. In other words, it was based on a broad range of opinions, numerous people, not just one or two. Borrowing from this publication, the following 4 principles have guided our choice of sustainability indicators. First, with only one exception, none of the indicators presented in this report are prescriptive. That is, they do not tell pastoralists what to do to manage properly. That's the role of producer training, education programs, extension, designed for specific rangeland environments, in particular production systems. Instead, the indicators presented in this report are output-oriented. They evaluate the environmental impacts, but do not attempt to specify the management practices that producers should implement to achieve positive results. The dominant idea is that livestock grazing management is highly site-specific, and thus management strategies are context-dependent. Put simply, it depends. There's no single best approach to grazing management in all situations, and multiple approaches can produce similar results. Secondly, a recurring reason for choosing our 10 indicators is that they are affordable, practical, and technically feasible for livestock managers to implement, often asking for information that they already know about or can easily verify. This is important because livestock producers are the first point of contact in gathering the data that goes into assessing sustainability. Thirdly, we have sought indicators for which there is ample scientific evidence. Our selection of indicators is based on the Sustainable Rangelands Roundtable report entitled Criteria and Indicators of Sustainable Rangeland Management, edited by Mitchell and published in 2010. This report, that's a long one, provides a comprehensive, scientifically based review of rangeland management standards. The Roundtable report draws heavily on research conducted on fenced ranching systems, and we have adjusted its recommendations to apply to both fenced and unfenced systems of production. Finally, we assume that no single indicator or restricted group of indicators will best unlock the secret of rangeland sustainability. A wide range of different attributes of grazing systems and indicators of the different attributes are needed to produce a balanced assessment of something as complex and open-ended as the environmental sustainability of rangelands. Our draft indices include soil conservation, 2 indicators, water conservation, 2 indicators, the composition and abundance of rangeland vegetation, 3 indicators, and 1 indicator each on livestock populations, herd mobility, and pastoral access to natural resources. Hopefully, this report will initiate a debate about how to identify a reliable yet affordable set of indicators for the environmental sustainability of range livestock production. Producers in different environments, scientists representing alternative professional specializations, commercial interests, producer groups, consumer groups, everyone's likely to have their own perspective on the task of measuring rangeland sustainability. A consensus may be difficult to reach, but nonetheless worth pursuing. Have a look at our attempt to provoke and structure such a discussion. Thank you for your time and for your attention.
Great, thank you, Roy, also an absentee. So next we have a presentation from Dr. Julian Bayliss, who I understand is online. Dr. Bayliss is a conservation scientist, a senior ecologist with over 30 years of experience in environmental management. He's worked across a whole range of biomes, forests, mountains, wetlands, and led major biodiversity projects throughout Africa, noting in particular Ethiopia, Malawi, Mozambique, and Tanzania. A fellow of the Royal Entomological Society at a point, and of the Royal Geographical Society. It's clear he's got deep expertise in ecological research and advanced technology for conservation. So we're really pleased to have you here, Julian, to talk to us about investing in rangelands, the Rangeland Ecosystem Services Procedure. Please take it away. We can see you.
Okay, good morning, everybody. And can you hear me? Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you and see you.
Lovely, good. Okay, so let's start from the beginning. So thank you very much, Dave. There we go. There we are. So today I'm going to present on an ecosystem services process framework, which is work in progress through the Rangeland Stewardship Council. I am essentially the consultant senior ecologist to the Rangeland Stewardship Council. So ecosystem services, verification and validation. Climate critical rangelands cover 54% of the global terrestrial surface. So they cover a significant part of our globe. Essentially, they're divided into 7 types or biomes, the largest of which is the desert and dry shrubland biome. And then that's followed by the tropical and subtropical grasslands, the tundra, the temperate grasslands, the Mediterranean forests, and then the flooded grasslands. So what is an ecosystem service? An ecosystem service is any benefit that humans derive from healthy ecosystems. In other words, they are the goods and services provided by nature to humankind. Essentially, ecosystem services are grouped into 4 main categories, and these are known as provisioning services, such as the production of food and water, regulating services, such as the control of climate and disease, supporting services, such as nutrient cycles and oxygen production, and cultural services, such as spiritual and recreational benefits. And so all of these are relevant to global rangelands. And evaluations of ecosystem services often includes assigning economic values to them. And the benefits of rangeland ecosystem services, for example, can include the provision of food, natural pollination of crops, clean air and water, carbon sequestration and storage, nature-based tourism, or even flood control. And these are just to name but a few of the ecosystem services that rangelands produce. So the RSC Ecosystem Services Process Framework essentially provides a structured approach for rangeland managers to identify and declare ecosystem services that are found within their rangelands, and they aim to improve, select appropriate indicators to measure these impacts, and collect and analyze data, and then demonstrate positive outcomes. Throughout this process, there is an emphasis on the appropriate methodology, stakeholder engagement, and transparency. And the requirements can vary depending upon the rangeland in question or the ecosystem service that is being measured. There are many ecosystem services, but there are some major types, major broad ecosystem services that are not just unique to rangelands, but from other habitat types as well. But in our cases, this process can be used to demonstrate positive impact on the 6 major types of rangeland ecosystem services, which are carbon, storage and sequestration, biodiversity conservation, hydrology in the form of watershed management, soil preservation, nature-based tourism, and cultural services, and heritage, which involves heritage. By following this process framework, rangeland managers can quantify and verify their contributions to ecosystem health and sustainability, which can be valuable for various reasons, such as enhancing marketing and communication efforts, assessing ecosystem service markets or payments, supporting sustainability reporting, demonstrating compliance with environmental regulation or standards, such as the rangeland standards. More specifically, the RSC Ecosystem Services Process Framework offers a voluntary framework to demonstrate positive impacts of responsible management practices on these ecosystem services, which are the ones being verified, and then you verify the impacts to prove this. This process framework allows certificate holders and sponsors to make ecosystem services claims to promote and communicate about verified impacts as part of their broader sustainability strategies. Essentially, the process follows a verification and validation process. Following these steps of declaration of the ecosystem service, a description of the current and past conditions. You need a baseline from which you then measure. Selection of outcome indicators, measurement of indicator values, preparation of a rangeland ecosystem services report, and then evaluation by a certification body, followed by verification and validation. Schematically, it looks something like this, where you have application stage, a certification stage, an impact demonstration stage, a verification stage, you then have a submission stage, and then an approval stage. Going through the various stages, we look at the first one, verification of the ecosystem services impacts. Rangeland managers have to demonstrate their positive impacts on ecosystem services compiled into a Rangeland Ecosystem Services report, which involves proper documentation of the ecosystem service impacts, flexibility in multiple impacts, opportunity to re-verification and revalidation of these impacts, and transparency through public disclosure, and then compliance with the established standards. The validation of ecosystem services is the next step, and that involves a proclamation and defines what impacts are being claimed and how they're being demonstrated, an elaboration of the ecosystem services, identification of outcome indicators, the measurement of outcome indicators, the reporting and interpretation of the results, and notifying certification authorities to significant program updates. Stage 3 involves leveraging verified ecosystem services impacts for strategic planning. And this essentially involves a fair and transparent revenue sharing model, establishing structured sponsorship agreements, effectively communicating validated ecosystem service impacts through supply chain partners. The stage 4 is the promotion of the verified and validated ecosystem service impacts. ES claims and promotions, criteria for making credible ES claims, evaluating the credibility of statements, marketing rangeland sourced products, evaluating the credibility of sponsor ES claims, and advocating proven impacts. And finally, the last stage, requirements of the ecosystem service evaluation, are the applicability, the expansion of existing requirements, a continuous improvement procedure, which is very important, assessment schedule, timing evaluations, and audit findings, and then finally reporting criteria. And that is essentially your process framework for verification and validation of your ecosystem services. The impact indicators that you would look at for each of the ecosystem services, well, for carbon, it would involve carbon stocks, carbon storage, restoration and sequestration, essentially improving rangeland carbon stocks through sustainable rangeland management and rangeland conservation. For biodiversity conservation, it would be all about, linking, connecting, improving a protected area network and a natural rangeland environment, a natural rangeland ecosystem. Enriching rangeland cover, functional biodiversity, which is very important. In nature, everything is connected, and species diversity. And then also, obviously, a focus on what's special about each rangeland. What are the rare, threatened, and endemic species or habitats that we find specific to particular rangelands? For hydrology, we're looking at improving water quality, securing the watersheds and the streams and the rivers. So that's all about land degradation. That links into land degradation as well. And this falls on to soil preservation in terms of improving soil condition and stability and protection against soil erosion. Nature-based tourism is important. So one of the impact indicators involves socio-ecological benefits from rangeland nature-based tourism, populations of species of interest for nature-based tourism as well, things to bring in nature-based tourists. What makes it special? Why will they come? What is attractive? And how do we measure and monitor this? And then cultural services, maintaining and improving cultural heritage services and species of cultural heritage. So in summary, the Rangeland Stewardship Council Ecosystem Services Process Framework is a structured set of guidelines that outlines how rangeland managers can demonstrate and measure positive impacts of management prescriptions. Impacts can add value and promote a broader rangeland management sustainability strategy. Essentially, good quality ecosystem services equate to healthy rangelands. Healthy rangelands are more productive and support healthy animals and more sustainable livelihoods. Ultimately, all of this supports the One Health approach and the connectivity between the human health, the animal health, and the environmental health. As I said before, in nature, everything is connected. So this is where we are with the One Health approach. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Julian. Fantastic work there. So I'm wary we've got about 12 more minutes left, but we're now getting into the more free-flowing bit. I'm wary that Lennart has patiently been sitting over there waiting for his opportunity to say something as well. So just quickly to introduce Lennart, he's a global livestock investment specialist with ILRI based in Nairobi, Kenya, working on the sustainable investments for large-scale rangeland restoration project, so the Stella project, which ultimately aims to reverse rangeland degradation and improve productivity globally through sustainable livestock value chains that benefit pastoralists and other users. So, Lennart, I mean, the RSC and all the stuff that we've been talking about here fits neatly as part of the Stella umbrella. So it'd be great to hear a little bit more about what's going on with Stella more broadly, and specifically, it would be great to hear a little bit from you about how you feel various stakeholders, say local communities, private sectors, policymakers, etc., can be a bit more involved in not just this aspect, but the Stella project more broadly.
Is it working? Yeah. Yeah. First of all, thanks for coming, everybody. Appreciate it. Even though it's for most of us the last day, so it is appreciated. Yeah. Thanks for the question. So yeah, the Stella project, we are trying to bring in the private sector to invest in rangeland restoration through value chains. So basically developing business cases. I mean, obviously it's so because we've seen that there's a lot of movement in terms of sustainability in the private sector as well, but just for the sake of doing good, there's not enough money involved to reverse the degradation of the rangelands. So that's why we need to monetize it. And we already created a few interesting approaches together with the private sector. And yeah, and that's what we're trying to do. That's as a next step. But obviously, for the private sectors as well, they can get a certification or whatsoever to show the customers that they're doing good. And that's why we're collaborating with SFA. And also, the SFA has already a great network. So I think it's both sides mutual benefit from the collaboration, but we also work together with other CG centers and other research organizations, for example, on the monitoring part, because monitoring is obviously very important to see the progress that we're doing. And therefore, yeah, we brought on a variety of experts to this program. But then to the other question that you mentioned, the stakeholders, communities, etc. Uno mentioned already collaboration, and I think that's what I would like to see. At the moment, it's often they're in the silos, unfortunately. We would like to see more that they're going to break down the silos and have a more holistic approach and work together. Yeah, but going back to reality, I think it's unfortunately not the case. So in silos, if you I don't know, you want to see that as a sandwich, so to say. I would maybe put the communities at the bottom, not because I want to be disrespectful, but because they're on the ground, so to say. So they can be part of the implementation team, so to say, that implement these projects. They also can provide, because already put them at the bottom-up feedback, because they're on the ground, they know what's going on, they see the changes, they know what they need, or where is need basically for investments. In the middle, the juicy part, that's where I'm working on the investment part, or the financial source, so to say, that could be provided by the private sector. Yeah, as I said, we were setting up the business cases so that also can monetize these investments and enable these projects. And then at the top-down approach, as you can imagine, it's the policymakers. I've been to many meetings here, and lots of time I've heard that we need more regulation, but I would suggest maybe we need better regulation, because when you talk to private sector, they always say it's over-regulated, and often they come up with some new rules and regulations, but don't really communicate it. And I think there's also need and also simplify them so that a normal business owner or a private sector player can understand what they actually should do. And also, I think the government or policymakers, they can create awareness, for example, or can also look at maybe other ways how to integrate sustainability in our lives. For example, schools. So I see my daughter, for example, she goes to school and they had a subject on sustainability. So it's really nice. I mean, how aware she is. I mean, sometimes it can be also a bit annoying because she then tells me what to do and what not to do, but that's a different story. Yeah, so I think there are many ways how policymakers could maybe change the approach and and kind of promote rangeland restoration. I mean, or in general, and environmental improvements. But yeah, going back, I would like to see a more holistic approach, collaboration. I think that would be great if the three could collaborate more. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
One thing you touched on there was you started talking a little bit about M&E and monitoring, and it's important to finance. I'd be interested to if you're able to unpack that a little bit more, to explain like why is the M&E part so important even at the basic level. And Shalini, I'll come to you after Leonard has finished to a similar question for around the role of research in M&E for the Rangeland Standard specifically. But Leonard.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not the M&E expert, but it's definitely important if you want to do something good for your environmental footprint, for example. I mean, the European Union to come up with new rules and regulations. And for example, at the moment, we're targeting fiber value chains, mohair, cashmere, obviously. And there's some regulations that say that natural fiber is actually worse for the environment than synthetic fiber, because they don't look at the big picture. So obviously you need to show them maybe as well that you're doing something good, that it's actually not as bad, and that the rangeland, also when we go back to rangeland restoration projects, that you kind of see how the rangelands have changed over time, and that your investment actually had an impact. And when you come to monetizing it, let's say you come to carbon credits, obviously you have to show also that there is carbon in the soil, for example.
Yeah. I mean, you touched on something there that actually winds me up for quite a long time. But obviously, it's important to do M&E, but it's also important to do M&E well. You know, where you sometimes see these projects where there's a tiny nominal amount of M&E, and then the conclusions that come out of it can make things worse, like the thing you're describing there with the animal fibers. Shalini, I'll go to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Ray, for that question. I think it was really good to be mentioned in the beginning, like how important MEL is, and the resource required for that is definitely very important, because until we, allocate sufficient resource, we can't do good M&E. But the research and M&E both plays a very vital role in ensuring the effectiveness and adaptability of any standard, and specifically here when we are talking about global rangeland standards, because research serve as the foundation of the standard by generating, evidence-based insights into best practices for sustainable rangeland management, and it supports the identification of regionally specific solutions and guides the incorporation of global sustainability frameworks such as the One Health approach, what you already mentioned. And this also ensures that, this standard addresses key challenges like biodiversity loss, soil degradation, and climate change. So the research helps us to know where we are at on these topics, and then M&E ensures that it's not static, and it evolves over the time and remain relevant and impactful, and also guide us better, like what needs to be done where, like, if you collect the data and if you monitor it and you see how, what impact it has on environment or socioeconomic status, or if you look at the compliance and, measure the progress, how it's going, and that, data helps you to understand how a standard is being implemented and then how it affects the ecosystems and the communities. So that's how monitoring helps. And then evaluation, on the other hand, takes a deeper dive into understanding the outcomes and impacts of the GRS, if we talk about here on the global rangelands. And it also, it's just not that, like, first thing is definitely we want to see whether it is achieving our intended positive impact or not, but these type of evaluation also help us to find out any unintended negative effect as well. And overall, I think, this whole MEL fosters accountability and transparency, by providing stakeholders the evidence of the effectiveness of the program. And it's just not for monitoring them, but it's also then gives you the feedback, and then how you improvise it and how you address that during the implementation, and making sure that it remains effective and it achieves its intended positive impact. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Shalini. So I recognize we only got 2 minutes left. So I'll go for one question to Julian, then I'll start to sum up. And Una, it would be great if you could come up and give sort of a final thought about next steps and what our, as Julian is dropped off. Okay, well then.
Not quite, I'm here.
He is here. Okay, brilliant. Julian, I was going to ask you about what challenges exist in balancing rangeland resource production with biodiversity conservation and ecosystem health. I guess if you agree with the premise of the question at all, there's something here that needs to be balanced, or at least.
Sure, I think this can be a fairly quick answer. I think it's really all about identifying thresholds of sustainability, because as I was saying in my presentation, everything is connected. So it's all connected at different levels. So it's all about identifying sustainable thresholds between the balance of humankind, animal welfare, and the environment. So in terms of biological conservation or biodiversity, then it's all about ecological integrity. So it's all about identifying where that threshold is that maintains the ecological integrity of the natural landscape. That's the short answer.
Great, wonderful. Okay, so just to wrap up, in half an hour in this same space, we have a session developing the SFA camelid scope, which would fit with underneath the umbrella of the RSC. So if you're particularly interested in camelids and camels and how we would set a standard for certifying that and learning a bit more about the RSC as a case study, please do join us for that. But for now, Una, would you be willing to just say a last cap for this session, sort of what the next steps are and how people can participate?
Yeah, thank you everybody for joining for a long session. And we have, as part of a Rangeland Stewardship Council, we're going to continue several consultations going off in the new year. So we would like you to join our consultations, and we've got a number of working groups that are working, and we wanted to invite you to join in those working group. We have in the next year in June, we have a major stage in Adelaide, International Rangeland Congress. So please join us. All of us will be there, and bringing our Science Technical Committee and Monitoring Evaluation a committee is going to be bringing stage for consultation there as well. We have Land Conference in DC in May, in New York, in Washington. Please join us. Also in Scotland in September, we're going to have, in Edinburgh, going to have a conference in September. So come and join us. More of anything, we are all here. We've got a partner of 12 people that would like to engage and discuss, and essentially all of us have a role to play. And thank you for your kind attention, and come and join us, our camelid standard. And